Thank you, Shika. Thank you, Akriti, and the entire Legal Era team for having me talk on this very illustrious webinar. Um, it's always hard speaking after Mr. Sundaram and Rohan. Okay, and I always learn a lot, and I ponder after these sessions on things that typically you don't think of on a daily basis. So always a learning experience for me, and I'm sure everyone who's been attending has so many things to take away from what these two legendary people have had to add before me. I am, of course, going to talk a little bit about where we are heading in a practical area with respect to tax, and what I foresee some aspects which are going to have a huge impact going forward from here. I think some of these aspects have already been touched by Mr. Sundaram, where he spoke about investigation, where he spoke about unjust enrichment, and some of the problems that the industry is facing from a tax perspective. We've had, of course, some very interesting insight from Rohan on the entire issue relating to borderless tax and how, for example, the world needs to reimagine tax as business goes away. We live truly in a borderless world today after COVID, and it's been exposed front and center that it is not required that a person needs to be or a business needs to be in a particular physical place in order for you to be able to do business in that place. Okay. Today, I think we are as distributed as we've ever been in our human civilization. And I think there are some real things to learn from in order to be able to do so. What I am going to talk a little bit is on two topics that I thought are of interest. One, I'm going to talk a little bit about what's the future of tax and tax litigation. And I'm going to talk about the future of tax from a technology perspective. And it'll be a nice segue to the next webinar or panel we're going to be doing on technology and legal technology trends. So to start with, where is tax litigation really heading? And we've had all these reforms over the last few years. We've had some settlement schemes. We've had some form of drive to kind of reduce litigation and make it a little less adversarial, a little bit more easy to comply. We've had the GST reforms where we've removed large number of laws, tax laws, and replaced them with more unified and a more simpler system. And has it really gone ahead and solved the problems that we really sought to solve? And then on the income tax, we've kind of gone through this theme of trying to have MLI come into play. At the same time, we're struggling with some of the aspects that we will see, things like equalization levy, things like G20 tax, other things, which are really creating issues for the businesses as a whole. So what's really happening in this world? I think more than ever before, our world is split into two fundamental segments. We have the traditional industry and we have the digital industry. And I think that's there to stay. I think the economics of a traditional industry are very different from the economics of a digital industry. And many of the traditional companies are going to flip to become digital companies in the future. But today, at least, there is a clear demarcation between traditional companies and your so-called digital companies. And if you take the last 100 years of jurisprudence that we have developed in tax, it's aimed at how to regulate traditional industries. Traditional industries really meaning industries which are physically located in a particular place, are nicely encompassed in a particular jurisdiction, and who actually operate on the basis of physical transactions preceding digital transactions. So really you want people who are making and selling and trading in goods and services which are in some way tangible. Okay, that's really what is traditional, right? And then you have the digital industry, which is really based on everything being intangible, the transaction itself taking place on the World Wide Web, where the value is created not so much in the physical nature of the product being sold, but in networks, in technologies, in efficiencies, and in services, which can be now provided seamlessly without any human intervention. So there are two really split worlds that we are living in. The last 100 years of jurisprudence is really being how to figure out how to do traditional. And I think GST, when we implemented in India, was at the cusp of being able to address what a traditional company in a traditional economy is able to manage. And I think you will see the litigations when it comes to traditional economies and traditional companies is going to significantly reduce over the next 5 to 10 years time. But I think digital is something which is a step forward for tax, and neither income tax nor GST is really placed to be able to handle that, because it looks back on the experience of traditional industries and it has no real tools to be able to deal with the digital industry. Yes, there will be some ways where the transaction and sale and recording will get covered both in income tax and this thing in GST. But realistically speaking, we are going to struggle. Okay. When I work with digital companies, I can just see them scratching their head, trying to comply with a traditional system meant for a traditional industry. Today, for example, digital is coming up in a big way in the area of e-commerce. Agri-tech is becoming big. Online gaming is becoming big. Health tech is going to take off going forward. Fintech is already there to stay. And there are a variety of other areas in digital era which are coming up, which are going to have a significant impact in our lives going forward. And many times the tax rules just don't make sense for them. Okay, the tax doesn't understand intermediaries and how they operate. Tax doesn't understand how, for example, you can have transactions related to goods and services that are otherwise exempt, but the underlying supply is essential for us to be able to manage that. So it creates a whole host of complexities. And I think the future of tax litigation really is going to be in the digital area. It's going to be on payments and incentives and on structures and transactions, which I think we've not seen in the past and which are complex and find it even more difficult for the normal adjudicators and the courts to be able to understand. So a big shout out to Rohan for suggesting having adjudication panels of experts which are independent of the system, where you pay a fee like arbitration and have the disputes resolved. I hope in our legal life, we're able to see some of these reforms and we're able to change that. But I think that will be a great solution if we're able to implement that. But suffice to say, digital is probably going to be the biggest problem for us going forward from a tax perspective, both on income tax side. And we're already seeing some parts of it in how equalization levy is being proposed and how some of the other aspects are being brought into play. We're also seeing some impact of tax litigation, just like, for example, Mr. Sridharan said, of there being a lot of distrust between the regulator, the tax regulator, and businesses. The tax regulator always thinks of businesses as being people or entities who are designing their businesses all the time to be able to avoid payment of taxes. And then you have the businesses who are saying that just make something simple for us so that we don't have to deal with the tax. We want to comply. We want to get on with our business, and tax should not be a factor in our success. So there's a disconnect between the two. And investigators always take a few black sheep to be able to make their point. And businesses always look at regulators and saying that those who comply, the burden falls the maximum on them. So I think that's one problem that I think we need to be resolved over a period of time. And that's going to be an important aspect of how, for example, our tax litigation and our tax administration progresses from here onwards. But having said, I don't see a great improvement in this regard happening anytime soon. Just moving from tax litigation, the other trend that I really see, and I think something which is very welcome, is the increasing use of technology in tax. And I think that's again something which is very heartening, but at the same time needs to be taken care of a little bit carefully. So we have a lot more push towards using of technology for the purpose of being able to administer taxes. We have a lot more aspects relating to use of a large amount of data, which is being coming through the income tax department as also the GST department, to be able to determine who is doing what, who is complying. And that's going to be the future, using more and more of artificial intelligence rather than human thought and experience for the purpose of being able to do investigation. At some level, it was seen as an answer to the problems of investigation and investigating authorities. But this might be something which needs to be a little bit more carefully looked at. But regardless of that, one of the things that I see a lot is companies now are more oriented towards using technology for the tax problems. Okay. And I think it always starts at the bottom, where you use technology to be able to solve the simplest problems. But over time, it kind of progresses up to cover more and more complex aspects. So I see a lot more of ERPs evolving to be able to handle tax issues and be able to use technology for the purpose of being able to file returns, to be able to collate data, to be able to analyze data, and so on and so forth. And I think we'll see that more and more, even with practitioners, when we move into this era of face-to-face assessments, when we move into era where data is the basis for determinations, where we will be looking at technology more seriously for the purpose of being able to handle that. And I think that kind of works very well with the way the economy and the country is moving towards this becoming more and more digital. So I think in this regard, there have been some very positive trends with respect to technology. And I think as we get more sophisticated in technology, and people like ourselves, so firms now look at more and more technology to be able to support what we are doing for the purpose of being able to provide our services and to be able to assist our clients. And that's going to be an important part of the journey for tax administration and tax investigations and tax litigations and just tax compliance in general. I think that's really where I think the world is kind of moving to. So the two aspects really, digital, our world is more digital than it has ever been. And digital is not just in the domain of the business, but more and more percolating into tax administration. And that's going to be something that's going to be very interesting to see over the next few years, how this is going to change the landscape of tax. Thank you with that. I thought I would address these points. And again, it's been wonderful listening to all the esteemed speakers before me on their thoughts and experiences. Thank you.